All right, this is the 12th, not the 11th episode of Writer's Block. The 11th episode died. I just fucked up the recording. I muted my own mic somehow. What really happened, I want to start in, a place of humility. It was I fucked up. It was my fault. I apologize to the fans. But do you know what happened? A guy who comments on, every video, likes all my tweets, name is Yams in the Can or something like this. This motherfucker keeps bothering me, telling me to fix the audio on my recording, so I tried a different way of, stabilizing the audio levels, and I didn't do my normal audio check. So I'm basically getting to, it's not my fault at all. It's all this poor fan whose Truson is loving us. His fault that episode broke. So if you want to be a fan of the show, don't be a fan. That's what I'm getting to. Just don't stop watching. Don't put that pressure on us, and then we'll make more episodes. This all makes sense. Okay, so we're a little break in Counter-Strike right now. We're doing the August player break thing. And I thought we'd do a more historical topic, get out of the week-to-week. Who's good? Why is this team not good? Why is MSL allowed to exist in this world? Sort of classic Writer's Block topics. But I thought we'd go to our favorite historical teams and then sort of... Because, I was talking with Stuchu. We were supposed to be talking about the map pool and pick and ban phases, but I ended up, gushing about my true love Gambit 2017. And, I just sort of enjoyed grinding my axe a little bit against sort of the misconceptions about that team. And I was just, I thought we just do sort of a round robin where we go over our own favorite historical team and sort of try to fix the horrible fan narratives, the misconceptions of the past, rewrite history now that we have a podcast that we told people to not watch. Okay, so Sam, in the not pre-show, you gave me a good day, 2 days advance on your favorite team, Dignitas/North.
So this is just going to be about MSL after all.
Yeah, you try to get away from it, but you really can't. Yeah. I'll try to ask,
That's all I think about.
Questions about other people, but
it is all I think about. I can't lie.
It's fucking hilarious.
Yeah,
out of all the teams,
even on
it's I have to actively not tweet about it at this point.
Yeah.
But okay, so Sam,
I'm ready.
Give me your broad thoughts. Why is North select Dignitas a favorite team? What about them curry your favor?
Masochism.
Yeah. Well, they're not my favorite teams. They're my favorite team to talk about. My favorite team is TSM 2015, but no one has anything to say about them. They were pretty and hot and gorgeous, and I loved them, especially Kerrigan. But I'm getting distracted. Point is, North 2016, 2017 Dig. What's interesting about that team to me is that they were so close to getting so good, and yet they didn't. And trying to pick out exactly why and why they turned out to return to mediocrity is a really interesting thing that no one has quite figured out yet. And so it's not a played out narrative to me. It's still something that's very much alive. And I could write an article about that team today and still feel like I have things to say, even though I've written, tens of thousands of words about that team already. Yeah.
All right, Max, just to get an outsider's perspective, let's get out of Sam land. What's a reasonable expectation? What's your perspective on that team? Because I think if I'm trying to just be the most normal Reddit commenter, I hate to go into that train of mind, but I think the way that most people in the community would think of it is okay, Dig won one tournament, Epicenter, did nothing after that, was okay, made some playoffs as North after Rubino left, but really wasn't exciting. Okay, made one final, made two finals. One was ESL Pro League Season 5 or 6, and the other one was that DreamHack Open, was it? It was after the player break, it was about a year ago. What was that? Right at DreamHack. It was...
Was that the one that
G2 was it G2 one? Oh wait, who won that one? It
You're getting
was
bogged down in the
it was
details.
Astralis beat
Yeah,
Gambit.
it's
A Gambit played North in the semis. Then North played G2 in the final, and then G2 won, or is it?
Dude,
Could not tell you. Yeah, you
Dude.
dug yourself this little hole.
Oh, okay.
That
Yeah.
requires Liquipedia as a ladder to escape, of which
Yeah.
I'm not pulling up.
Anyway,
Um,
point is they didn't do much.
What was the tournament that this is gonna just get into another hole that SK Gaming lost in the group stage after
Oh my
winning
God.
the after winning the major in 2016.
I don't know, bro.
You know they lost to
The one
Mouse
isn't
Sports
on the
and
show. No one
Tyler.
knows that shit.
I don't know that shit, dude. I just watch VOD, son. I'm
Yeah,
not like
okay.
some
Yeah,
encyclopedia.
I'm
of results.
on the HLTV page.
The name, it has some weird.
Why are we wasting time?
I don't.
Yeah.
This is really a
Anyway.
great start to the show. Just trying to
Anyway,
fill in.
go on.
Okay,
It
but
doesn't
North made
matter.
only 2 second places. Wasn't a great team overall. What is this a fair summary of that team? What do you think about that team, Max?
Okay, well, I think that in terms of that narrative specifically, it sort of neglects a lot of the great names and the legendary performances associated with North and Dignitas, even in spite of them not necessarily being a team that like posted the results. There was always this brooding potential and the sort of tension of their stars that always interested me a lot in Dignitas and North. And sort of obviously I've like retroactively like mapped my feelings of MSL onto the Dignitas North rosters, so it has a bit of interest in that sense. But yeah, I mainly think of when I think of North and Dignitas, I think of sort of the the tension of their star players, how they operated in MSL system, and then also like what people like Magisk and Config have done, and KGB, I guess, in lieu of leaving North. And also Kirby, just like sort of more so like the trajectories of specific players after that specific lineup.
Config has done fuck all since leaving North, but
Hey, dude,
okay.
they
But
beat
Sam, I
Ents
mean,
at the EU minor, bro.
Okay, what do you think
wouldn't
about
mind
this?
thank yous.
like, okay, so there's some moments. DreamHack Masters Malmo was what I was thinking of, 2017, and there's DreamHack Masters Malmo 2016 was the other one I was thinking of with SK. But anyway, what were you thinking about with North? Like, what was the big triumphs? Like, do you think where's the moments where you saw? I mean, there's obviously Epicenter, but what was there specific series to you, Sam, that where you saw this potential? Where did this kernel of hope come from?
specific series, you did not give me time. Actually,
Oh no,
to
not
prepare,
specific
but
series,
there is
but like
one series
ideas,
that
thoughts.
perfectly encapsulates this team, which was the first E League major against VP
in the quarterfinals.
in the quarterfinals when
Cobblestone.
they went up 13-2. Magisk absolutely date raping the still prime. That might be insensitive. The prime VP team fucked him. Okay, and then second half totally fall apart. Something that we've seen from North a lot after. That to me was a series that was ultimately depressing and kind of broke the soul of that team, because at that point, a top four would have been a very strong result for them, given the results prior to that, because they had been slumping since Epicenter. And I think that probably would have, I mean, obviously I haven't talked to Rubino, but I assume that would have kept the team together. It was a very, very disappointing series, I think. And it was just like, they also lost to VP the major after that. It was just like, that was just depressing. But to me, what was cool about this team is that it was a team that had two players in it, which is Magisk and Config, that were legit stars, that were, good, as good as any other team at that point. Like, when you look back, maybe they didn't have the firepower that FaZe had, a year after. But if you look at the first FaZe roster and you look at that Dig roster, it's not that far apart, man. Originally, Magisk had been like an amazing player. He was a top 5 player in the world. And sure, his stats were a little inflated, but the way that Magisk at that time would be set up to respond to pressure in beautiful ways, which he still does now in Astralis, just less emphasis on him. The way that he played positions like Pit, like was just such a beautiful player to watch, and the way that Config played aggressively at that time. He wasn't his full potential like that we saw later in that year, but he was still around 95%. And that team just had like the when we look at this team now, and we look, oh, what do they need? Oh, well, they need superstar firepower. They're missing that it factor. Well, they had 2 it factors at that time, which is part of why they were so affected. And on top of that, they, all the narratives that came afterwards were fixed by that roster. No support player. Well, they had Rubino, and no superstar opper. Well, it doesn't matter when you have 2 superstar riflers, and now they have no riflers and no opper.
Yeah.
So.
But they have AZ, and that's all that matters.
Okay. Well, there's like a couple questions I have about this because, all right, there's a couple narratives, there are a couple like points that people like to bring up. First is a point that I think gets brought up a lot is that game on Cobblestone with Magix. And when I was talking to Stucci, I don't know if this actually was in the show or pre-show, but I remember talking about North with him. I think it was in the show, but he was like, I jokingly said, without really thinking about it was like, yeah, I think Magix was about a superstar for a good period of half a map, that one map on Cobblestone. But is that too hard? I mean, okay. And the other question is the effect of Urbino's leaving on North moving forward, where you see AZ coming in. I mean, so the first question I really have, maybe.
Oh, you cut out there.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. What did you?
First question.
The first question would be, how good was Magix prior to Rubino leaving, and you sort of see him slump 2017 on North? The second question would be, how good, like what was the problem with AZ and how that was integrated? Sam, do you want to tackle, because you wrote that interesting article on the roles on North, I think about late summer 2017. Do you want to tackle the roles with AZ question, and then Max maybe talk about how good Magix was prior to his sort of slump, and then maybe you can contrast it to current Magix?
Yeah, sure. Well, back then Magix was playing roles that were he was more an open site kind of player. He was playing with the rest of his team. He was playing off his team, and so his team could bait for him more easily, and he could be more of a if you will, like a late execute player, where when they went on CT side, when he was receiving an execute, he would be the last barrier of entry, and that was extremely effective on maps like Overpass and maps like Mirage. He was incredibly good on those maps, and the reason I think that he struggled statistically afterwards, part of it has to do with his attitude. As people in the North organization have made clear to me, it wasn't all MSL's fault. But another part of why he took a dip statistically is because for whatever reason, his positions were moved to more isolated positions. And I don't think that isolated positions on CT side is exactly where Magix shined at that point in time. Maybe he's a more developed player now and he can play those positions effectively, but I felt like where he did the most damage was in those positions. And when you have players like Zipex or players like Device who can really, you can put emphasis on them when you're playing on a site, it's fine. Magix can be more of a third wheel and do whatever he needs to be doing. But when he's at that point in time one of the best players in the world and by far the best player on your team, it's very disappointing to see him take a step back on certain spots, like a site on Cobblestone or a site on Mirage, simply because you want to accommodate a player who's frankly worse than the player that left.
AZ, you're talking about.
Yeah. So when you want to accommodate AZ, despite the fact that AZ was at that time worse than Rubino and less versatile, that was, to me at that time, that's what pissed me off, frankly.
Yeah. Okay. And you did write that article, right, in about summer last year.
Which I regret, but yes, I did.
Yeah. And then Max, what do you think about Magix? Like, I think Thorne made this interesting tweet the other day where he was like, people want to rewrite history where Magix doesn't have that slump in 2017. He was good prior to, say, the start of 2017 and then is good now. Do you think,
what do you think about Magic during this period? If you have the memory for it, was he was he superstar player legitimately, or did he just have these occasional bursts where he looked super strong? Like I remember League Season 1, he had some games in the group stage where he looked really strong.
Yeah.
On what was that?
It was
SK? It was the old SK, Danish SK, right?
Yeah, because I remember reading that tweet as well and being like, oh, in my head, maybe it is just like the survivorship bias, whatever. But I do only remember like the good games of Magisk in 2017. But sort of tying to Sam's point and talking about how there was a shift of Magisk on CT side, sort of to a more like isolated roles on CT side when AZ came in. I think that's a super interesting contrast to the most neglected framing to talk about Magisk, which is that of Optic Magisk. If we want to dredge that shit up.
I mean, I just never watched that team. I was not interested in Freiburg and the men. Freiburg and his men.
It's funny because they were like a shit team, but they had all these players that had like these very interesting like individual narratives heading into the Optic team.
It was like a shitty novel where it's like we gotta get the old guy to like lead the new recruits. He's an outcast and they're gonna take on the world. No, it was like just some narrative.
Seems like a 13-year-old like fan drama of just like and then Freiburg's gonna come in and he's gonna call, and then HS he's got fucking mad hair, he's gonna entry frag for us.
It's like a Harry Potter fanfic where Ron Weasley's the protagonist. He is not redeeming qualities, guys. Like, just let him just not be part of the main thing.
But in that, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, is like Magisk was clearly the best player on Optic, like by far and away, just completely dominant. And I watched a fair few of their series, sort of out of like sheer curiosity, like this perverse curiosity as to how Optic would play, because they didn't win a best of 3 on LAN. So I was like, how is this going to sort of play out over time, thinking the roster would be together. And what I saw was Magisk on CT side was so dominant in like these multi-kill positions and so ability to thrive not off of his team, and like with the sort of individualized grace that I didn't see from him on like North per se. I always felt like Magisk was a really good player within what he needed to do within a round, as opposed to being like some sort of incredible transient player that plays bigger than like the system he's in. I think he can definitely have moments that are bigger than that, but definitely not out of line with where he should be in the team. I think that's also reflected in the way he plays with Astralis right now. But definitely in Optic, I think that was like his sort of experimental teenage years where he was forced to find himself a little bit and found himself to be an exceptional fucking CT side player, especially with the big Mixwell not having the best games alongside of him. So
here's some perspective on how good Magisk was in 2016. Okay, he had this about the same percentage of maps with +1 rating as Coldzera, and he also had the same rating on LAN as Coldzera in 2016 when he was on Dignitas.
That's 2016 Coldzera as well. That's no joke shit.
Yeah.
But
so
he
was on
20
rating, boy. Come on, that guy was insane, especially since he started out poorly when he first won the roster. So there's no doubt that he wasn't like by far the most consistent player ever, but he was very consistent, and part of that had to do with his roles. Obviously, he's going to be more consistent than Config was at his peak because he's much more passive. But he was about as consistent as Coldzera was, and he fragged about as much as Coldzera did. That doesn't mean that he was as good as Coldzera. That means that he was very, very, very good at that time. And I don't think that people just, fantasize about him and create narratives. Like at that time in late 2016, he was a legitimate candidate for, top 5 player in the world. And the fact that team did so poorly at the end after Epicenter, given his high performances and giving Configs high performances, is very strange. Like, it's just such a weird. That's why I'm so curious about it. Like, why did this team do with so much potential and actually clicked? Like, there were like periods of time where they clicked, and yet, after winning this biggest LAN and being good for a while and rising, suddenly it all falls apart. and they bomb out in quarterfinals of E-League. They don't even make the playoffs of ESL Pro League, and then they bomb out at DreamHack Winter as well. And so, what happened to this team? To me, that's just so interesting. And that says since then, if you look at what's happened since then, the fact that MSL, now we're getting into it.
Yeah.
All right, here we go, boys.
That MSL and Rugga, to be fair, didn't make this team work it's either a tragedy of how young Magisk and Conflict were, that they weren't mature enough at that time, or it's a massive failing on the part of those leaders, those mature presences in the team, to be able to carry those guys emotionally and be able to make them fit into a professional team. Because I guess with time, what we're seeing with Magisk, that he's operating very well in this roster. And I didn't hear anything about Magisk in that Optic team. I heard things about other players, but nothing about Magisk. So it's strange to me that in the matter of like a year, he could go from this super mature player and all that. Because it's not like there are many more veterans on. I guess Zonic's a veteran and Glaive is kind of a veteran, but Glaive isn't more of a veteran than MSL. It's not like Zonic is much older, if older at all, than Casper. Rugga. And so, to me, it seems like a failing on the part of the North organization, is that increasingly with the development of Magisk in the past year, that they couldn't make that roster work. Now, Config's another story. We saw the whole fucking Stanislaw thing, and maybe Config lost cause.
That's the shit that tilts me, though. Like, everyone's getting behind Stanislaw. It's like, oh, they can't deal with these horribly out of control Danish players. And then no one has any sympathy for MSL. But let's put that in the can. Let's not freak out about that.
Well, no one has any sympathy. Stanislaw got kicked. MSL didn't get kicked. Magisk got kicked, and Config got kicked. You don't have to pity MSL.
I have to. Okay, but anyway, all right. Let me just do my backyard dad impression here and just gently place this T-ball on top of the tee for Max here. What do you think?
Oh no, I feel like I'm gonna miss whatever it is. I'm like immediately.
What do you think about this? The classic North embarrassment of losing that game on Nuke to what was the Australian team at
Chiefs.
Sydney.
Oh,
Chiefs.
here we go.
This you're ready for this.
Yeah, I'm fucking ready. Yeah, well, what? Just what do I think about it?
No, okay, that's sort of like a classic embarrassment. I mean,
I'm fucking ready, dude.
It was a strange thing where North also has declines. And I guess we sort of talked about the sort of weirdness and the not being able to make the roles work, and sort of Magic's not living up to form. But then there's these weird, embarrassing moments. Is like, as someone who might be a little bit familiar with the Chiefs, and maybe you were at that event, right? I mean,
yeah.
Does anything did you glean anything from this embarrassing episode? Does this inspire hatred from MSL moving forward that manifested itself more recently?
Yeah. The seeds were sowed very early on. Yeah. So the big thing with that game specifically was it was on Nuke, and it might be an interesting caveat to know that Nuke is like a very sort of big map in Australia. Like, a lot of Australian teams play Nuke, and there's a lot of time and effort poured into developing sort of gimmicks on that map. And
they have to go to the down under map in Australia.
All right, I'm gonna ignore that. And then so the Chiefs had this very interesting execute. I believe it was for A. And I think it was like they made up this execute. It was sort of this novel strat, and they were getting momentum built into the game, and then they started calling this strat, which North hadn't seen before. And Wooly, who was the coach of Chiefs at the time, was asking him what like the communication was like in game, and whether he had any influence on the sort of deployment of this interesting strat. And allegedly, it was just like it worked, and then the general mood of the team was, "Oh, we're just gonna fucking do that again," and then they did it again. They just kept doing that again, and then they won the game. So that was the big North upset that simultaneously gave the Australian scene hope, which has in the long run been detrimental to my mental health, and then in the also long run has sowed the seeds for like a justified hatred of Danish players. So an interesting
to be fair, in that map, MSL had a 1.41 rating and Magisk had a 0.52. So
well, that invalidates everything you've been saying for the last 15 minutes, Sam.
But no, but this is interesting actually, because what's interesting, I think, about North and Danish teams in general, but it's especially North because they're not as good as Astralis, is that when they're not expecting or considering something, they're totally bad. They're terrible at adapting to it. Like they have a plan, and if they take into consideration whatever you're going to do in their plan, then they'll be fine. But if you do something like if you're rushing apartment, I remember this play where if you're rushing apartments and Kerrigan decides to stand in a smoke in apartments, and then you try to plant the bomb and totally ignore the possibility that Kerrigan could have stood in that smoke, like you're gonna get fucked, and that happens all the time for North. It's the strangest thing. And like, so to me, it makes, even though there's a strategic team and you wouldn't think they would get upset by worse teams because they play strategically, it makes sense that they sometimes lose those maps. Like terribly, they got wrecked on that T side, right? So like it makes sense because they're going to see something they're not expecting and didn't take it into consideration because they can't study fucking Chiefs. Like if they're going, I am Sydney. Like,
my DMs are always open, baby.
And so they're just gonna do whatever, and doing whatever very much doesn't work for that for North. Like it just.
And just real quick follow up: does Snappy fit into that mold of Danish leader that you're talking about?
Well, okay. Here's a story from Counterpoints. The Imperial coach was talking to us because he recently beat Optic.
Max, Sam is on an episode of Counterpoints that is yet to air for
It'll
people
air
curious.
This airs. It's fine.
Okay, I'll probably air.
Anyways,
I don't know.
So he was talking about this best of 3 against Optic because they just beat them, and he said like, well, the thing about North and Optic is that they're quite predictable, and so we with Optic we just organized all our T strats to figure out where Snappy was, and we wherever Snappy was.
That's good.
Which is a straight strat, but they did win convincingly, so good for them. But so all that to say that I don't know, the conclusion that I got from him, his vibe was that Danish teams, those 2 Danish teams are predictable, and it just seems to be like a consequence of when you're concentrating so hard on making a plan and trying to act on that plan, when variables that you didn't create, when you didn't input certain variables, it's going to come out all jumbled. Like if you plan on them being here, here, and here, and they turn out to if you expect them to have a passive B hole on Inferno, and one of them decides to hide behind the crates, you're just and you don't consider it just because you're so focused on what you're doing and your plan and where you're going to look when you cross the smoke, then you're just going to get caught off guard. And I feel like it's a consequence of playing so tactically that you just end up getting caught off guard because you're focusing on other things. While if you're playing in a very puggy style and you're making puggy plays, you're thinking about the other team making puggy plays, right? Like if you're always holding one and done spots or off angles, you're going to expect someone else to hold those one and done spots or off angles way more than someone who never does that, because that's cheesy, right?
That's reasonable.
Yeah. Well, that's my theory.
I was sort of thinking the same thing in my head when this topic was brought up, that like if you're sort of conditioned to do certain things, then you won't expect the unexpected because you've been so drilled in trying to do X, A, then B, then C, then D. You don't expect someone to come in and do something stupid between B and C, right? You're so this sort of the drilling sort of makes it hard for you to anticipate weird or unexpected plays, and it makes it seem like you're sort of bad at reacting to things. And then there's the other component. Go ahead.
I was just going to jump in and say that like ties into the whole thing of like Danish teams just collapsing when
being mentally weak was what I was about to say.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you going with your point then?
No, well, that was my point. That like that's what people say about North and Astralis TSM previously, that they're mentally weak, that they choke or whatever. And I don't know guys. I ever try to be a DM lord and try to get into their heads or read into the tea leaves and the interviews. But I mean, it seems like there's something to that. I don't know.
But, I mean, it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that Astralis loses to Navi and FaZe. which have the most like bombastic players in the scene, right?
But those are the
Like-
two best teams.
No, sure,
wait,
but
wait.
when
Isn't
SK
Chris J on Mouse Sports? So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
believe
yeah,
the
yeah.
most bombastic
No.
players are definitely not.
No,
one
that's
of
fair.
those.
That's fair. But like, there's a reason they don't lose against Liquid, or that they historically had a good matchup against teams like SK.
For sure.
But at the
Yeah.
same time, when there's players like Nico on the server or Simple on the server, they can kind of get dicked. Or Electronic is a great example of someone who dicks players like Device because he just plays in a way that the Device isn't considering. I
Right.
posit. And so, like, it's always been the case that individual, like, prowess or, like, craziness, like, what I call the Dionysian aspect is something that very much troubles or frustrates Astralis and the rest of the Danish scene. But it's more apparent with Astralis because it happens in finals and things like that. But that's certainly, like, I don't think they're mentally weak at this point in the sense that they choke. I just think that if you want to say they're mentally weak, it's more like they can't react the same way that other teams react when shit like that happens.
I don't know. Sometimes, like, I remember that game North played semi-recently on second half of Inferno versus maybe, I forget the team, but where they were just gamble stacking sites over and over again until they lost completely on the CT side. He's like, this is a fucking breakdown. Like, this, I'm watching a mental breakdown.
But like, I think a team that actually mentally breaks down is like FaZe. I think FaZe mentally breaks down. Like, you can tell when they get.
Can you cite some examples so I can picture it in my brain?
Oh, sure. Well, there was a recent final, but while I'm googling that final, there was obviously the final moments of that Inferno match against Cloud9, where they just couldn't figure out a way to put any pressure on, and so they would have to make really late round decisions because they didn't extract any utility. But like, that's not the only examples. I'm thinking of recent examples where they lost matches where they choked on the second map and then they got bombed out in the last map. Like, I think it was against Big. Let me check. Yeah. It was against Big. They lost 16-13 on Train, and then they lost 16-6 on Inferno. Like, and the first half they went 3-12.
I can't remember that. I would have to watch that again, but I can sort of see your point.
But things happen to FaZe where if they get demotivated, they just become flat, right? Which is a noticeable difference in performance. Like, I don't think that at this point in time, anyway, like, if you want to talk about times like TSM in Dubai or something, we can have a different conversation. But I don't think that when Astralis loses against FaZe in that best of five at Sydney, when they lose against Na'Vi, I don't think that they're choking in that sense. I think they're choking because they can't adapt, or in the moment they're not reacting properly to just chaotic plays. And so in the moments where people get desperate and they make chaotic plays, they're not reacting properly to those, or in the same way that someone like FaZe does. So but anyway, that's my explain. But I think there's a difference between the two, because the difference between choking and not being able to do what you set out to do, and getting, just not being able to adapt naturally to a certain play in a high pressure situation.
Right. Well, Max, I sort of want to get into your topic. We sort of mentioned Navi briefly for a second there, Electronic. You said that you wanted to do
I'm
your...
going to narrow it down.
Yeah,
I'll
okay.
narrow it down.
I was like, you said Navi from
Yeah.
2015 to 2017.
I was at work and I realized I hadn't said anything, and there was some poached eggs being made, and I was like, fuck, I gotta do something, so I'll leave it open enough. But Navi is the team I've definitely watched the most of. And so I'm gonna wild card this bitch, and I'm gonna say the 2017 Navi that had Simple, Guardian, Seized, Edward, and Flamey.
Why? That team
one.
was shit.
Oh, dude, just like
That's so shit.
But that's why it's so fucking interesting to talk about, because it's like this. It's a similar thing with North. In fact, when we talk about the model, talking about that, these two superstar players. They had these fucking veterans. They should have done this. They should have done that.
At least one of their players didn't basically quit playing and just cashed in paychecks, waiting to join another team. Like, come on, that's I don't know that
That's like my memory of that team is the whole team stopped playing, just like quit. Like C's turned into a dumpster, right? Guardian was nothing.
Like the important part about talking and why this roster is important is how much context it gives to the current performances of Navi. Like that 2017, and especially Seized and Flamey, and the way Electronic fits into the system, and the way Simple is set up now, and the way Zeus calls, like all of Navi's success is like deeply rooted in the failures of that 2017 roster, in my opinion. And I think if you neglect analyzing this roster, you neglect a lot of the profundity of why Navi is so successful right now. Because like,
this is a guilt trip from an intense place. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And so people forget, like, especially when you see how successful Simple is right now, that he was like fucking like battling tooth and nail to get space in that Navi system with Seas, with like Guardian at the helm, right? And Seas was put in this very, very strange sort of scapegoaty role, but that one that he couldn't escape, so it was like a justified scapegoat. And then Flamey fell off the fucking cliff, and then when you compare Flamey in that year to Flamey now, you see two completely different players that like, and when people talk about Flamey right now, it's a similar sort of thing where they compare and contrast him against Simple rather than compare and contrasting him to himself last year and sort of the ghosts of his own play. So yeah, I have a fair bit that I could. Edward's been shit throughout. Like, he hasn't really done anything.
Well,
like, he's
okay. No, but tell me, like, what changed about the way Flamey plays?
Oh, well, first of all, it's obviously the secondary AWP is the biggest asterisk to that, but also the way he's positioned on T side, especially with Electronic, being able to be way more forward on the T side now. Flamey doesn't have to be as forward, so we can see him sort of play in a lot of later round scenarios and exercise a lot more of his very well-rounded game. And on CT side as well, he doesn't have to anchor as many sites, because he was the site anchor for a lot of Navi's small sites in 2017. And so we see players like Zeus now often anchoring sites, which is a strange thing, but it at least puts Flamey in more multi-kill scenarios and allows him to play more closely off of Edward. And then one of the reasons why Flamey failed so much so in that roster was because he was sort of ripped away from Seized, because Seized and Flamey was this crazy CT pairing that is sort of lost in the annals of time. But Flamey and Seized were this like 1-2 punch. They were really, really close friends outside the game. And they Seized would always try to enable Flamey's very sort of turret-like positioning, and would be very, very key in buying Flamey space in order for him to succeed on CT side. Except then when Simple joined the roster, Seized had to give up a lot of his positions to Simple on CT side, and so we saw Simple and Flamey playing on a fair few sites together. And so Flamey sort of was forced to not only change up his play style and accommodating for Simple and being more supportive on CT side, but then he was also deprived of a key teammate and supportive element. So then when you compare that to now, where like the changed nature of Flamey, it's like, oof, you know, this player is not necessarily like a middle of the pack dude. He's like a very quiet star, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to write something right now on Zeus. I'm like watching a bunch of VODs about going from old Navi to Gambit to new Navi, and sort of this hole is there, right, without Zeus, right, in this 2017 period. And I think the thing that people talk about so much is like, okay, well, as I'm going to say in the article, it's sort of like this ridiculous situation where they just think, okay, Zeus isn't there, they lose. Zeus is there, they win. It's all Zeus, right? There is obviously has to be some pretty dramatic ramifications in his re-entry on the T side. Sam, like, do you have any? I sort of just said this topic out, or do you? Is there something? How would you clear? Maybe this is a good broad question. Like, what do you think of Zeus's T sides? Is he do you think he's overrated? And what do you see in the T sides of Navi now? And what do you think Zeus brings to that?
That's interesting. I'm definitely not the best person. I'm not a masochist, so I didn't watch those fucking Navi teams. And
yeah, dude, I've revealed a lot about my character talking about how I watch like optic mods and like Navi mods.
Gambit. So, but what I will say, just so you guys can take all the glory, is that I think it's a weird way that Zeus has been kind of stereotyped you know, like he's been stereotyped as like he has this style where he has very, very late round situations and
ridiculous
grind out rounds and things like that, which he did do. Like he does that sometimes. It's a type of tactic, but I don't actually think that he does it as much as other teams have. Like I think that like SK, SK, like those teams have taken it down to the wire a lot in the last year or two. I don't think that Gambit and Na'Vi have struck me as being that kind of team. And so actually Na'Vi strikes me as being a much more like aggressive team than that.
Yeah, okay.
So,
so
why don't you guys tell me what their T-side style is instead of that?
Okay, here's my theory on the whole late round Na'Vi thing, and then I'll actually answer your question. But like, here's my like really broad theory on that, is that because it's so distinctive, like where they enter like really in those last few seconds of the round, that like cutting edge of getting the bomb down, and like right at 4 or 5, 6 seconds, that sort of is like what Max was saying before, like the survivor bias of like, or the outlier bias of like, oh, you remember these it's very strange, very tense moments. So like the idea of the very late round executes was attached to Na'Vi, even though it's definitely not every single round, and that's sort of been like this ridiculous stereotype. But the transition from like what I think of Astralis is like, it almost seems like, maybe this is a weird connection, but I've always thought, and I've never got a chance to put it into content, was that they're like sort of like the evolution of 2016 Na'Vi, where in 2017 you see Astralis also going for these very last second plants, last second executes, moves into sites, but it's not like you get the map control and you throw the execute and then you go into that site. It's like the opposite, that you slowly go up, get the map control, throw all the utility onto one site, and then you reverse and go to the other site, especially on overpass, right? You go do the quick
play the rotation game, yeah.
You instead of like brute forcing your way or like taking control of the site, you sort of force everyone to one side and then swing as fast as you can to the other side, and that's sort of like I think the cool little evolution of that. But Max, what you sort of nodded at the idea of aggressiveness in Navi's playbook right now. What were you thinking on that front?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Zeus is almost given too much praise in like how of this like crazy like tactical like carries around like a Bible of CS tactics, and he's like, oh yes, tactic 3861, we'll use that right now. I think he's far more of like this intuitive player, and you see that reflected in the way he plays individually, where he has like sometimes this very strange need. And I think we've already touched on this maybe a previous episode about like how these older IGLs just have this strange compulsion just to push smokes dry and just to do like these incredibly aggressive, like unreasonable plays based entirely on this justified intuition and like experience. And so I think Na'Vi have a lot of those sort of mirrored qualities in their T side as Zeus as a player does. In the sense that they
Zeus and Edward both sort of having that quality to the play. Coming out
definitely.
Yeah,
they will just go for a lot of, and it's like, it's not like they have unwilling players to do that. Like Electronics, like a rabid dog at the sort of like just both hands like gripped on the side of a door, just willing to like launch himself out onto a site. So I think they're very, very much geared towards, in terms of both mentality and the sort of nature of their firepower, to play an aggressive brand of CS. And it's also like you have Simple, who's finding these opening picks across the map, but is also very has a hunger to have players play aggressive around him, so he can play off of their space created by that, because even if they die, then he's afforded information and an ability to trade. And so yeah, I definitely think that Na'Vi is a team I'd think of very structured still. I think they still play like a very structured early round, but I don't think it's the same sort of structure as someone like Astralis. I think there's a lot of sort of free flowing, and based on, as you know, what I like to do, Scott, looking at the webcams in between rounds and how like Edward and Simple talks, I feel like there's a bit of it's no sort of dictatorship. I think there's a bit of democracy in how Na'Vi approach the later stages of a game and how teammates want to call T side. So I definitely don't think the Zeus stereotype of like these methodical late round situations.
Yeah.
Water.
Would it be strange?
Yeah, go
One
ahead.
second. Would it be strange to say that their T sides are pretty generic, and it's their CT sides that are really?
That's what I thought. That's my thought
Yeah.
always for Gambits during their sort of my interesting period. My interest in that team was that I never thought like, oh, you gotta watch Gambit's T round. They're so crazy. They're like the most obscure, interesting thing in the game. I think that it was mainly okay. This is sort of getting in my topic.
No, dude, do the
Yeah,
transition. Do the
But
transition.
I said, okay, we transitioned. I didn't even have to mention that. We
Yeah.
could have just said that
Yes.
super stealthy and made it look really cool. But my thought today, looking at old VODs, was like it's all about Hobbit and Dren being effective entry duo, aggressive force on the T sides, and not being a very tactical or ingenious strategy strategies with I will cut this out of the
Am I back?
yeah, okay.
I'm
I'll
back.
just cut that
Yeah.
like I can cut that little bit out of the VOD, or I could keep it. Who knows? But yeah, what I was saying, where did you cut off when I was talking
Adrenaline
about?
Hobbit, something.
Yeah, I think Hobbit and Adren are great. I think that they that's what brought the dynamic I can't say the word. Dynamic. I can't say it. The
Dynamism.
Dianism to the T side, not Zeus's strap book.
Well, to be fair, there's a lot like their map pool escapes me a bit, but from memory they did play. They did
Cobblestone
play
Overpass. And then they sort of
Train,
transitioned to Train, and they played
Train,
Inferno
But
at the major.
Those are maps where like rotations do matter a lot. So
Yes.
I do think that you have to give some credit to Zeus for CT sides, because most good CT sides rely on at least on some maps. Like I don't think it's not so much on maps like Mirage that much, but maps like Train and Overpass and Inferno, like those rotations matter a lot. And if those are coming from the in-game leader, then you have to give him a bit of credit there. But
yeah, and we don't really know how that was called. My thought was, I mean, maybe this is me being a little cheeky, was like, well, they still had that. Like you saw Gambit still having some success at DreamHack Masters Malamo 2017, the turn I could remember earlier, without Zeus. But yeah, no, I always thought it was more about the CT sides being interesting on that team, especially on maps like Cobblestone was the famous example, where they could win ridiculous retakes on A, and then they just play a sort of minimal mans, just have like Zeus and maybe Mo in the early round, Zeus, maybe Mo and Dren in the early round on B, I reversed that, my bad. But I always think B is A on Cobblestone, but yeah, just having Zeus on A and very minimal help and trying to just. I don't know. Zeus is weird where he just feels like if he doesn't want to be in shotgun range, he doesn't want to play that spot. Like he has to be like if he can't get a kill with a shotgun at that range, like he's just not going to play the spot. Like that's where he wants every single kill. And it's sort of weird. Like Max was saying that he's going to more like small side anchor roles on Navi, where I think of it more as like playing these weird like Train, ladder room, like that sort of, or Cobblestone A sort of places. But what?
Well, small side anchors are normally the kind of you can isolate, like you can choose the range at which you fight, and so there's a lot of small sites where you can play at a very close range. So like maps like Cache or Train or Inferno, Mirage, you can play at a really close range there if you want. You can stick in the apps, or around the truck, so you can actually. It makes sense that he's there. It just,
I mean, because he's like not a good player. Like I wouldn't put him at like the super. Like I wouldn't put him like close up at A on Mirage.
Well, yeah, like the thing is, where do you put him? But like, I think actually a Mirage is one of those spots where it's a bit of a throwaway spot. Like you can have some players that are really good at it, but a lot of teams are fine when they have a player that kind of like when Glaive is there or when Rush was there on Cloud9. Like it's not like those players were extremely proficient in those spots, but they gave enough information they could maybe got one frag. Like that to me
there on some of like North. Oh, maybe I'm thinking Optic Magus. That's why.
Yeah, well, he
My-
did play on the A side, but I think he was closer
Yeah.
to triple boxes than no,
Oh, gotcha.
or pit, But it doesn't matter. Like the point is that like that it makes more sense for me to put your worst player in an area with two of your other players than in a place alone. Like,
Well,
because
it depends
the
on.
thing is
Okay, here's what I was thinking about today, because I was actually thinking about this when I was looking at Zeus. If you have a player like MSL or Zeus, who I think are not good positional players, who are not can't be relied upon to make the right choices, why not put them in an aim-based role and just let them sort of but difficult aim-based roles, like hard entries. Like, I know me and you had this argument a few episodes ago, maybe it was a while back now, where it's like, well, MSL shouldn't entry, but like if they're gonna just why rely on them in late round? Like, why have them as a back of the pack guy if they're just gonna fuck that up? Like, you might as well try to do the entry role right, try to get whatever you can done, and just
I mean, Zeus has the highest flashbangs thrown, and you throw so.
Well, I'm talking more about old. He did the. See, I think Zeus's role has changed pretty significantly on current Navi, where he's not in the front of the pack guy on the T side. He's more like pack. And I was watching a Dust 2 game where he was doing a lot of lurking actually, but on the 2016 Navi before he was kicked, he was front of the pack with Edward a lot, and then on Gambit, I think he was more more middle pack, where it was Adrenin and Hobbit front of the pack. But it's sort of a rough spot. Where do you put Zeus? Do you let him be a utility player or a positional player? Do you let him be a aim player that just is put into really hard battles where that guy's probably going to lose anyway, so it doesn't really matter?
Oh, well, I think his current role is fine. Yeah. Especially when it's obviously it's not ideal, but I mean, I'm sure if you ask Zeus, I don't think he'd say he's a bad player. At least that's the vibe I get based on the way he approaches around. So I think he backs himself enough that it's fine. Especially because I definitely buy the idea of retakes being important, because I'm mainly thinking inner on train.
Yep.
Where it's okay, I almost want simple rotating into backside of train. I don't want him being there in the initial stages of the hit. I want in terms of allocating pressure, I would prefer to just train retakes really hard and then put my ship player on a site where
Taco,
he can maybe
or Zipnik, someone who's good positionally, maybe not your best fragger. Or
for sure,
good with utility and positioning.
And then when he dies, he can micromanage a retake. He doesn't have to worry. I think there's a lot of interesting benefits that you can get from having your shit IGL play anchor.
I don't know, because B inner is pretty hard to retake. So I think that you'd rather put them in a position where they can call a retake. You know what I mean? If you put him on A and he dies at A, then you can actually retake that side. Well, B is quite difficult. If your B player dies without getting a kill, you're probably losing that round.
I think, I don't know if I fully agree with that.
Yeah, well, someone like Doja plays it so passively that often it's it's just a big retake, it's like a 5v5 or something like that. I think that's works, okay as long as he secures a entryway into the site for the other players. It's hard with the upper level, but if you have the flanks coming from the right direction, it's okay. If you have something.
I see the inner site on train and it's all about the post plant pressure of the T's. Because generally speaking, if the CTs are retaking, they have the utility to be able to stop the bullshit molly being thrown from upper. They have a smoke for ramp. And so I think it's all about, and if we're talking about Gambit, I think someone like Hobbit is exceptional as a T and being able to get up and play those close range battles and being able to contest the CTs rotating in, because there's so many different angles you can take as the Ts in sort of the initial points of a retake, that you can buy so much time and space and resources for the players playing up in halls to use. And so to me, whenever I conceptualize a B retake on train, I always think of the post plant pressure of the Ts, how the CTs deal with that.
That post plant pressure it depends massively on how fast you kill that first player, right?
Yeah,
Like
true,
if you just
true.
kill him
Well,
immediately,
it's how far the T's get up the inner sight, right? How far they can
right?
move
Yeah,
up
but that's
before
what I mean. But like if you're playing, if someone like Zeus is there, who he isn't a passive player, like he isn't
No.
someone like Doshio or someone like Flamey, say, who could play that position and play far back, and if he's playing it like Stewie does, and yet or Olaf, and he plays it like that, but instead of getting a kill or two like regularly, he just kind of dies.
Right.
He's there like a massive liability. Well,
Right.
if you die at Ivy, or if you
Ivy's pretty important.
you probably won't die at Ivy though. Like most of the time, you're not going to die at Ivy. But like if you're playing on the A site, there's more leeway because the retake doesn't get shut down quite as quickly. There's more freedom to play around and make individual plays. Like the round isn't like nearly over. Like because if your player gets picked immediately on B inner, you have like 10 seconds to do something. And if you don't do something within those 10 seconds to create space for the rest of the CT side, as that second player, say like a simple, then you're fucked. You're locked out. Your team can't get in.
Right.
So, like I think see in a situation like that puts massive pressure on him to perform. But if you're in a position where like if you're a hard entry, say on a 5-man execute, then you're not that important. Your death is slightly more or less expendable. Not quite, but way closer. So it's easy. Like sure, but if you're the first point of contact in a position where it's pivotal, so if you're the first point of contact on a 2-man rush, then it really does matter whether or not you get a kill, right? Like if you're making a play, say around connector on Mirage on T side, and you're the first point of contact. That's what pisses me off about MSL. Like when MSL and AZ would be duoing around connector and trying to hard engage on players like Stewie or Rain and just die. Like it's just like the most depressing thing ever. Like they couldn't do anything. But if you have in those situations where it really does matter whether or not you get the first kill and you have high pressure on the first point of contact, then you probably shouldn't put your in-game leader. That's why I think it's difficult. Like if just say that you want a player, not necessarily an in-game leader, just a player like Zeus or a player like MSL who isn't. What's great about Zipex is that Zipex can control pressure super well, so he knows when to back off. He knows how to isolate angles.
He's like I thought of this term today, like a utility / positional player, like someone like Zipex, someone like Valde, someone like Paco, who like who seems comfortable in moving in response to pressure. If someone comes onto a site, who can feel comfortable moving around, seem to reposition to not just die the second that someone comes onto the site and try to fight them and try to use their aim. I mean, like an aimer might try to just like spray or like try to take those fights and just try to get a favorable trade, and then you that's sort of an interesting way of thinking about it. I was thinking about Inferno today. Like, do you want a positional player on Inferno B site, or do you want like a aimer so when you can trade? Do you want someone to like last as long as possible to try to
aimer?
Yeah, I think I was
just real quick before we leave the Zeus train thing. Na'Vi have won like 7 maps in a row on train, so I don't know how big of an issue Zeus anchoring inner is in that sense.
No, well, that's fine. You'd have to look at the VODs. Like I'm theorizing here. Like maybe there are other reasons they're winning. Maybe he's doing a fucking fantastic job on B inner. Like it's very possible. Like I don't know, but I'm just saying that in theory, I wouldn't do that. I would.
Dude, you can't use that qualifier when talking about Zeus. That man transcends theory, son. He's bigger than any theory crafting bullshit you can do.
He is quite big, yeah. But anyway,
I'm sort of looking for. I haven't done the research for the last little bit of my article on Zeus, but it's sort of interesting because he does switch roles all around on T and CT. So there's a lot of different versions. I think the public narrative surrounding him are really just one of the most off from what I consider reality. Maybe that's me being really far off from reality, but like maybe
for sure.
It's sort of weird because I'll sort of randomly bring up Gambit and shows like this and in my own written work. But is there like when you guys see me talk about this, is there some weird stuff where you disagree with me, or like why is he so interested in Gambit? Is there any thoughts on that front? Is there any other things that I think that are crazy?
I don't know why you think Gambit is so interesting.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I think. Okay, here's what I think. I think that most people think of Counter-Strike in terms of D, in terms of offense, and then they think of the CT as the receiving force, and they just try to spray as best as possible. Where I think that's CT is just as interesting as T in some respects. I think that Gambit is one of the most interesting CT teams, and how they try to, on certain maps, try very different setups, very different approaches to winning rounds, and they won rounds in a very different way on Cobblestone and Train than someone like SK or G2, who were also very good on Cobblestone at that period of time. And I think if you want to learn how to, I think for me, trying to think about conceptualize CT play, I think Gambit is a very interesting team to think about. Just like after Zeus left, and they had Fitch playing instead, like he seemed to actually be like the opposite, where I thought he preferred long range angles and taking duels from like distance, like on Ticket at Mirage. And then like because he's at Ticket and Mirage, and he's like the A anchor, he's really back on that site, right? So it's a very passive A setup. Like you have a guy connector, two guys B, and like maybe another guy, I don't know, somewhere else. But like, so it's like a very passive turtley setup on some of these maps, and that they still were able to win rounds. It's like a very bizarre thing to try to get your.
And what do you think of Wallaby about the idea of Gambit CT side being entirely characterized, at least in what I've heard, by this sort of like a turtle adjective? Like people just, at least in the way I hear them talked about on CT side, as this team that can just sort of hole up onto a site and then play the range game and play this sort of very passive CT side.
Yeah, no, I mean, but like, how do they make that work? Like, why is everyone else on Cobblestone trying to figure out ways to make to do the impossible and regress as CTs into Ts? Well, Gambit can make it work the other way. Why don't people try Gambit style? No one ever has done that other than Gambit. I think that's very interesting. It's just like, are these?
I think part of it is that they had just really passive players.
Doja is what I think of. This would create that style in my opinion.
Doja, but I think Hobbit too. Like I think of Hobbit kind of not quite as like straight and non-versatile as Doja, but I do think that like he is also that kind of player, and I think that Mo is also kind of baity. So that just might be because I don't think
Mo's gonna take a lot of op duels. I think Mo's gonna try to let people come into his crosshair, play at a mid range.
I think he wins a lot of op duels, Mo. And like a lot of my notes, I was going over them the other day, and I have a lot of cheeky little asterisks next to Mo being like this consistent sort of punishing AWPer. That
what period are you looking at?
Post Zeus, I think.
Oh,
and maybe
okay.
like there was the Krakow run. I think there were a couple of votes from that I broke down as well.
Oh, maybe. Well, he did have a very good Krakow, especially that Astralis series. But I always thought he was sort of a poor op dueler. But I know it depends who asks.
I hate Mo, but
you hate Mo.
But my point is that they have three players there that are relatively passive.
Yeah,
and so. Like, to me, it makes sense that their response to pressure would be to move backwards instead of, and even Dren can perfectly play aggressive, but it's not like he's a hyper aggressive player. Like when you don't have like a player like Stewie or a player like I'm trying to think at that time, a player like Feltz or a player like Fur. Well, those players respond to pressure aggressively or create pressure. But those players on CT side are just going to back up, and then talk about it and slowly move forward. And if you have players that work well with each other, that have chemistry when they're doing that and can communicate effectively, then they're just going to do it rather well. But I don't think they did it like fucking amazingly, like transcendently. I think
but I think they played very. I think Astralis, SK at points in their time together, maybe during the FNX period and sometime during the Phelps period. I haven't really been watching as much, looking as closely during the MIDR period, where they had a very good post-plant CT side, where they gather, play. Yeah, they played really. And then I think Astralis is just a strong fundamental team, and that sort of comes through in the post-plants. But I think there's this like stark difference between someone like a FaZe or a Navi, and I think like. If you think of it as a spectrum, the Gambit's sort of on the one end of the spectrum, and they could make it work. But we see a lot of these modern teams, Mouseport, FaZe, Navi, they don't gather. It's like my analogy. I made a small video on this that didn't get a lot of views, but it's like I call it like the difference between baseline tennis and smash and serve tennis. Like the idea of trying to just win the point. I think someone like a mouse ports will try to die. They'll die trying to defend site, and then if they just die, they die, and it's like, okay, we'll just save. But like someone like a Gambit is okay, we seed the site, we wait, like a baseliner, it's like we wait, and then we try to see our opportunity, and then we go in and try to win the point, right?
But I think that has to do with the players in that team and their natural responses to pressure, right? So like if you look at players like not Robs is a pretty passive player, but if you look at a player like Oscar or Sonny or now
Chris J recently,
Chris
right?
J,
he just doesn't care about dying at all.
Chris J in general, yeah. But on CT side, when they're getting aggressed, those motherfuckers will sit in smokes for days. They're going to move forward, responding to pressure, not backwards, and that's their natural inclination. So we like players like Stewie 2K are also like that. That's why he's such a problem child on SK, is because he has different natural response to pressure than the rest of his team. But like the point is that if your team works that way, then you're gonna if your team works like Gambit and you have a majority of passive players, then you're naturally gonna crawl backwards responding to pressure. And you have a team like Mouse, you're naturally gonna move upwards. So I think that's like the biggest reason why Gambit acted that way. And like who the fuck knows if they still do that now? Like
I haven't been watching. It's too depressing.
Hey, back to the masochism thing. Watch some games of Gambit Seized. Not bad, not bad. I enjoyed something. Made a video about it.
They
had one good tournament with Seized, right?
Yeah, they were okay with Seized, but now that they have no in-game leader, and now that they have Mir, and that's very bad. Like they've never been as bad as they are currently. No, but like, have you seen the results? Like they've lost analysis.
They are
very bad.
X3 bad.
No, but it's tragic how bad they are. Like
it is.
Just saying.
My heart's in two pieces. All right, closing thoughts. I think Sam's got to get going.
I do.
My love for Gambit approved, not approved.
Not approved.
My love of you, Scott, is approved, but your love of Gambit does not vicariously run through me.